I talked to Christian Uber from Starlight Distillery about how not all port finish whiskeys are created equal. We talk about what makes prime barrel selection so special, and Christian educates me on how different cooperages affect the finished product. More on that after the intro. Welcome to a second episode of the Prime Barrel Chronicles, where we speak to different distilleries, different producers, to have an opportunity for them to come on and share some of the beginnings, how they got a start in this industry, and talk to them about a bunch of other stuff, including our own single barrel selection. So with that being said, please welcome Christian Huber. He is one of the owners of Starlight Distillery, or should I say Carl Huber's winery. Christian, which one is it?
Well, thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'm the seventh generation of Starlight Distillery and Huber Winery. And so we can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to get on here and talk a little bit about my family, the history, and what makes Starlight a little different than others in the craft market.
Absolutely. Love to have you. This coincides with a couple of Starlight selections that we made with you last summer. And obviously we wanted you to come on and talk to us, to educate some of the guys that might not even know who Starlight is, although I find it hard to believe. So why don't we start with you talking about your family business, a little bit of a history of the Starlight, and then your rise to prominence in the world of single barrel selections.
Well, yeah, well, thank you. And it's a quite long heritage. So we were actually founded back in 1843. So it was founded by my great grandfather. Simon Huber was an immigrant from Baden-Baden, Germany. He was a second son of a estate over in Germany. Didn't get any of the land right, didn't get any of the estate right. So he decided to, quote unquote, take his luck to the new world and see what he could come up with. He took the basic model of his estate over in Germany, kind of replicated it here in America. During the 1800s, 1843, the Ohio River Valley was actually known for winemaking. It's hard to believe now, with the rise of California and the westward expansion, to believe that most of the wineries in America were actually Ohio River Valley at one point. But back in that day, they were. So naturally, he settled here in Starlight, Indiana, and started actually vinification of different wines. So that was kind of the very, very start of Starlight Distillery. Now, throughout the generations, we were always into winemaking, into fruit winemaking, and then into fruit distillation. And that kind of leads us up to more modern times. But throughout the generations, Starlight always focused on your terroir-driven, sustainable growing, and quality winemaking and quality spirits. But it was something that really no one knew about, and really it took us over 170 years to really get people to actually come up here and respect kind of what we're trying to show. In 2001, my father kind of revitalized the distillation world here in Indiana. There was only one license that was allowed to run, as we know it, is NGP. As you know, NGP is a little bit of everywhere and in a lot of different labels.
Ubiquitous, correct.
Yeah, he was the only distillery allowed to run post-prohibition, until my father and others tried to get Indiana to start producing bourbon. But Indiana really didn't want to do that. So naturally, they gave us the right to distill for the first time after Prohibition, but only gave us the right to do brandy. So in 2001, the Starlight Distillery was only producing brandy. So we were taking fruit off our estate, our apple brandy, our apple, our pears, our peaches, our grapes, and making eau de vie brandy. But when you're talking about in history of Starlight, that's why we have so much older brandies. Today we have 21-year-old brandy that's coming out into the market. I believe it actually birthdayed last week. So that's our oldest barrel that we have. We have apple brandy. We just came out with a 10-year-old bottle of Bond. But in 2001, that's kind of what the humble beginnings of Starlight was. It was, farm to bottle, craft, sustainable brandy. And we cut our teeth on that. Going forward from there, in 2005, 2006, that's when my father was introduced to Dave Pickrell. He was one of the founding members of ADI. We met Penn Jensen and a lot of the quote unquote superstars of the industry. And they used to actually hold their meetings here at Starlight. It was very centrally located. And, you know, we were able to have that. And that's where I, as a little kid, was able to grow up with those guys, especially Dave Pickrell, who I think was one of my biggest mentors growing up, him and Mr. Wes Henderson from Angels Envy. But in 2005, 6, 7, my dad tried to get Indiana to really start distillation back here in the States. And it took him until 2013 before Indiana was allowed to distill bourbon and rye and grain-based spirits again. And it was funny because we did not have the support from NGPI until that year, and then magically it got pushed through. Basically in 2013 is whenever we actually started the grain distillery. So Starlight, relatively young still within the nature of distilling grain-based spirits. Now, we had a lot of good mentors, and Starlight would have never have been what it is today without those people who really had, you know, pioneered our mash bills, pioneered our fermentations, the distillation, the way we built the still. We would not have been here without those people. And we wouldn't have been here and talking today with a program like we have without those people who helped blaze that trail above us. We didn't reinvent the wheel. This is something that everyone has knowledge of. We just did it in our unique way. We focused under craft distillation, not craft sourcing. And that was one of the biggest things the first time that we were an Indiana distillery that was non-NGP, that was focusing under farm to bottle, sustainable, you know, spirits. And it took a while.
Which I know Dave was actually super big on. He's done the same thing with a couple other places he went to and consulted. So yeah.
And to your point though, it's without those guys, it was just a kind of a dream for us. But going back into the distillation realm of it, we never had to reinvent the wheel. We just focused under our niche kind of market, took our winemaking knowledge into the distillation, which was something kind of a new concept for a lot of people. I'll tell you that.
Right. So it's great. And it helps me. So I knew a lot about it, but I didn't know to that level of detail. Let's talk about just something that makes your distillery quite unique in my eye is what you just touched up on, which is the grain to bottle to glass, however you want to call it, method, right? And I've been to your estate. It's huge. It's a beautiful estate. So whoever is watching this, if you have an opportunity, should definitely come and check it out. You'll receive hospitality second to none, and you'll get to learn a lot more on premises, and hopefully you'll get to taste a few things on premises. So let's talk about your whiskey line of business and how did you guys get into the single barrels?
When it talks about the single barrel portfolio, we figured out really early on to be competitive in the marketplace, you got to find your niche. For instance, you know, we could not compete with Wild Turkey 101 at the price they were doing it and at the age they were doing it. I mean, it wasn't very logical for us to try to shoot that market. Same thing with, you know, Henry McKenna 10s. I mean, you had these great Elijah Craig. I mean, I can go on and on and on. It's hard to compete with legacy brands like that in the space of 100 proof and below. And that was something that we had to realize and learn the hard way. And so for those who are listening who have distilleries or thinking about starting a brand, that's a hard, very saturated market with a lot of bigger guys that their cost in goods and services are going to be less than yours, and they're going to be able to beat you to the market. We learned that the hard way. Our core items, when we rolled them out, our 90 proof bourbon, 92 proof bourbon, you know, I thought came out at a really good price, around $32. Most of the central United States did. But it's still very hard to compete with Russell's Reserve 10 at the same price point. So that was something we had to learn and adapt to. Same thing with our vodka, even though it's 100% non-GMO, estate grown, vodka, it was still something that you could buy Tito's or Platinum. And that was something that, we had to learn the hard way. And it was positioning ourselves with the right people and selling to the right bars and the right restaurants to be able to highlight that. And we got some, potential moving. This, of course, is all whenever I was away. At that point, I was just graduating from a university in Ontario, Canada. I was finishing up my wine internship in Italy, and I think I was living in California at this time when Dad brought me home to kind of revitalize the whiskey program. And what I found was there's a market, not gap, but a market void when it comes to individual single barrels, and not single barrels meaning just straight bourbon whiskey, but projects that everyone sought after but weren't in the single barrel marketplace, like sherry, like ports, stuff that you saw in upper tier small batches, but you never saw in the single barrel SKU. So I kind of first shot after about 4 or 5 key clients here in the state of Indiana that I thought were movers and shakers, and I really tried to find individual mash bills that highlighted what was great both as a whiskey but also would complement the finish. And I really took a lot of time into, finding these unique expressions and being able to highlight something that not a lot of people have had the opportunity to try, but also would be, good for the money that was going into it. I wanted to make people feel like they were getting something above what they paid for and something that they were going to enjoy and realize they were supporting a family-owned, family-ran sustainable farm. So we rolled out the program.
When did you start doing this?
Pretty much 2016, 2017. In our portfolio, we had some 2-year bourbon get picked. And we had some 3-year bourbon.
I'm not surprised. No.
And that was something that was, we look back on and we laughed. But, you have to go through that as your own distillate, right?
I'll tell you a little anecdote, a little off tangent, but somewhat on a topic. Last summer, when we saw you in person and when we picked those 2 barrels, we did a tour around Kentucky before we got into you. And we've visited a lot of craft distilleries. And one thing I took away from that trip is that 90% of them didn't really have anything.
Yeah.
Whatever they did have, the 2-year juice, as they say, was not good at all. That actually benefited you guys in a way that when we visited you, you guys have probably one of the best sub 5-year-old whiskey on the market. And I'm not just, blowing smoke up your, what, it's really that good. It was a perfect storm in terms of, hey, this is the bad experience we just had. And hey, oh, holy crap, this is so good. We ended up picking 2 barrels because that wasn't an intention to begin with, but we ended up picking up 2 barrels.
Well, and I will say to that, we distill very differently than most of the counterparts 20 minutes down the road. For those who are listening, Starlight is literally just on the other side of Louisville, Kentucky, about 20 minutes from downtown. So we're as close to the heart of bourbon as you can get with wrong side of the river. So again, we were brandy makers first, and we understood fruit distillation. So our whiskey and our distillate, especially for those who buy these 2 awesome prime barrels that are coming out, they're very, brandy and fruit forward. Take a snapshot of Four Roses is, a lot of raspberry, a lot of floralness to it. Then your traditional Kentucky style whiskey, which really is oily and viscous when it's younger, but can be very, very ageable. But with our whiskey, we wanted to try something that was floral, light, fruity stuff that we honestly like to drink, which was brandy. And especially Four Roses, I'm not just just talking them up, but our family enjoyed their single barrel portfolio and the way they were highlighting it. And so we took a playbook off that kind of flavor profile. But I will say, going back to the 2- and 3-year whiskey, it was a long stretch of time, and it was as a fight. Every single client, we try to find them something that was one, but it was 2- and 3-year whiskey. Nowadays, Starlight, we have nothing younger than 4 that's coming out. And that's just by law. We're not, or by our own family law, we're never going back. We have 4-year whiskey, and now we're getting older and older stuff with the family reserve stock now going to 8 and 9 years. and hopefully we just keep putting it back and putting it back. And that way we can offer people 8 to 12-year picks. My dad's constantly told us that craft whiskey doesn't give you the right to charge double the amount for twice as young whiskey. And that was kind of the motto that Starlight stuck with. And I think that's one of the big reasons why, we were able to come out of, the bourbon boom, so to speak, with a lot of clients, because we tried to find a price point range that we were happy with, but people felt like they were getting a steal, so to speak. And we were finding, profiles that people haven't done. And we were using our winemaking background to do these finishes that haven't been done in North America. They were done in Scotch a little bit, but even some of these new finishes, they weren't even done in Scotland yet. So it was something that was, it was fun, exciting. We got people around it, but we can go into like the difference between why we jumped into that marketplace some more. But
actually, that's plenty. You brought up something that I think is more interesting to talk about to me personally, and I think to other people watching, which is those finishes. And I think you guys, I don't know if you started the trend, but you certainly were one of the pioneers in terms of finishing bourbons in many different unusual, right, casks. And most people probably don't realize is that you are actually a wine connoisseur. I know this firsthand, but Christian here is a wine lover, and that kind of transferred over to his whiskey making in terms of some of his finishing barrels. So why don't you talk about your passion for wine, number one, but also how that transfers to your whiskey making?
Yeah, so kind of going into it, again, we were wine forward before we were spirits. Me and Blake are both viticulture and enology.
Your brother?
Yeah, my brother Blake, he graduated from Cornell University with B&E, but we both worked in the wine industry first. Me personally, I've worked for Cantina Palio in Southern Italy. I've worked for Cake Bread, Joseph Phelps, Domaine Chandon. My brother, very similar, Domaine Chandon, and then he worked under Dominus, which is Christian Moex's Napa Valley estate. And we loved wine. And people in the quote unquote whiskey world, it's a different part of your brain that you use wine, especially smelling finishing cask. And a lot of the finishing casks that were coming to Kentucky in the import were awful. I mean, the very first year I came over, I was smelling sulfured barrels that people were filling up with bourbon. They were awful finishing. And then naturally what happened, the consumers went away from finishing barrels. But the actual guys that were picking these barrels just did not know the difference between what a great cask was and what wasn't. And I'm not saying that for everyone. That's just within my experience helping some people out. I mean, they couldn't tell the difference between Brettanomyces, if it's re-fermentation, even in casks with the sweet wines, or if it's just a flat, sulfured barrel. And again, that was something that was kind of new, and the whiskey industry still to this day hasn't quite figured that out yet. And people are getting better of it. Secondly, though, it was time and barrel to find, balancing points. The old Kentucky or old bourbon tradition of, put it in wood longer, it gets better concept rolled into finishing, right? A 1-year finish is better than an 8-month, or a 4-year finish is better than a 2-year finish. And that was not exactly right either, because the finishes started to overwhelm the whiskey and you started losing what the whiskey was as a whole.
Especially the wine ones.
Yeah, and Oloroso and PX for sure is another one, those ports. But looking at Starlight's history within finishing, we had a lot to learn. And still to this day, no joke, every Saturday and Sunday, me and my brother and dad, when we're on property, we taste different finishing casks and we deem them when they're ready to go and when they're not, which can be frustrating to some people. Particularly, I'm going to use 2 clients, I won't say their names, but they're both on PX barrels, right? PX sherry, finished ryes. And this particular gentleman picked probably last March, and this other gentleman picked pretty much in September. The person in September is going to get their cask first. And he asked why. I'm like, the balance and integration of this cask just happened to be a little bit more further mature versus the counterpart that the one you picked in March. And you can taste them, you can clearly see, but if you're just looking on paper, it doesn't make any sense. but being able to dial in individual finishing casks to find when it's perfectly balanced was key. Not all, just like bourbon, single barrels can be different from each other, one barrel apart. Same thing happens within wine. You're going to have variational differences between vineyards, between varietals. And so it's something that you really have to look at and something you really have to pinpoint. And it's a learning curve. I mean, I'm still learning today. I'll be the first one to own up to. I've overfinished cask. I've underfinished cask, but I continue to learn. I'm 26 years old. I got a lot to learn as a distiller, and hopefully have some other mentors come in my life and help me. But being able to pick out, those exact casks are what we're really proud of. And that leads into your first cask, if you want to introduce the first one.
Yeah, so let's do that actually. So we have two casks coming out, and let me actually tell people the story how that all came together. So we came, as I said, to your estate to pick straight bourbon. A, that's what we wanted to do for the club at the time, and B, honestly, at the time, I did not realize how many different expressions, different finishes you actually have. And by the way, those constantly change, and you keep adding to it, and you keep looking for different casks. That's something that I've learned there on premises. Long story short, we ended up with a 4-grain bourbon. Ironically, it was our very first barrel that we tasted, and then we must have tasted 6 others after it, and we kept coming back to the first one. It was just that good. So we picked that one, but serendipitously, somebody offered us a finishing bourbon as an introduction almost into that world. And one of the things that we tasted was a port finished one. And what just blew me away on that one is the best way to describe that barrel is it drinks in layers. Like, just when you think you kind of hit on the predominant note, the other one comes through, and then the other one, and the other. So it goes like in waves, and it's not really typical in whiskey. So we had to have that one too. So we ended up picking both. But if you can tell a little bit more on how those two specific games, I don't know if you know those, if you even remember, but if you can talk a little bit more about those, I think that would be great.
Well, and to my notes is you picked a Canton cooperage as your straight bourbon, which is one of my all-time favorite cooperages here. And I'm not saying that Canton is something that gets a lot of fruit and a lot of wood sugar. Particularly, Canton is a French cooper that makes American oak barrels here in Lebanon, Kentucky, and they are an expensive barrel, but I love them because they air dry all their wood. To my knowledge, if I ran the number right on your barrel, you have a 2-year air dry wood. That means the staves were just put into a yard and it was just seasoned. Imagine like a cast iron skillet, right? Yep. Just use it's all that weather to it, which has a lot of degradation to the wood that helps leach out those tannins so you don't get the bitterness as much. And they're super strong in lignin. And, Canton conveniently has a lot of tight grain and a really interesting toast or profile to it, pulling a lot of that butterscotch, a lot of that caramel, a lot of that fruit note to the surface of it. So that's really what you're going to feel within that particular cask. It's going to drink very, very aromatic, sweet. But again, with that high rye and that 4-grain, you're going to have a nice little rye spice that's going to perceive a little bit more of the orange peel, that more citrus bomb in the back end of it, which tends to be balanced. Our 4-grain is something that a lot of people enjoy based on the fruit, the wood sugars, but the rye spice comparatively to our 3-grain. The mash bill is comprised of 51% corn, 20% rye, 20% malted barley, and 9% wheat. So 20% rye content and minimum corn, you're still getting that sweetness from that lignin in that wood. This particular cask is aged 100% in Warehouse 2. Warehouse 2 is the very first ever what we call our red rick house that sits on the property. It was aged on kind of the what we're going to call the west side of the building. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to think it was in 14 or 15, that Canton lot, one of those 2 rows. But it gets that hotter afternoon sun and that concentration happen within the cask. But moving on to that into the port, we source a lot of different ports, a whole lot. We just were in Portugal last year buying barrels. So we source ruby and tawny, of course, are the main two, but we also do white port. So our port cast finishes vary, drastically for what we're doing. Yours, of course, is the Portuguese port. Again, Targa Nacional is most likely the grape. But we add that foregrain, that sweet caramel butterscotch, and we add on layers of that chocolate kind of dustiness, that sweet concentrated raisinated grape to it. Which just makes it super complex. Interesting enough, for those who get the bottle of this or get lucky enough to get the bottle of it, let it open up in your glass, because that's chocolatey, darker blueberries really pull out to the bowl of the glass. And it's still, I haven't checked the cask exactly on yours that you're getting in. Most of them range between 105 to 110 proof. So it's very still aromatically or proof wise up there. So it has a lot to life to give. And it's something that if you just sit there and smell it, it will change, it will adapt. But I will say, comparatively to the foregrain, it's going to hit on different sides of your palate, right? Port, especially the tannin structure that it has into it, will be broad, it will be filling. So this is a good whiskey to have with food or charcuterie as you're going into it, because it will completely change and adapt as you go forward. For those who are listening to, the next time we get you out here, I mean, the finishing casks are definitely diverse, and they're definitely something that every single one we do is going to change, and you're going to wonder what profile Starlight has, because for different blends, we highlight different things. And that is something that, we struggle as a challenge, because your representation of Starlight, and you come back and do another finish, it's not like the big distilleries where we have one big mash bill, right? We select barrels to truly highlight and finesse the finishing cast, so it elevates it out. But sometimes Starlight can seem, very different, depends on the person that you talk to, which makes it fun for those people who is just getting introduced to it. It's like a rabbit hole, so to speak.
We could have a whole nother call just on that. I mean, there's so many there, and you keep adding to it. What would you say are some of your most sought after finishes?
So, I mean, leading the pack, first one, in my opinion, just because it's out there more than the other one I'll mention, is probably our honey. Our honey was probably the first one to really get bigger attention. The honey cask comes directly from our estate. So on average, we harvest about 2,400 pounds of raw honey off the farm a year. Our full-time beekeeper, Kevin Bowman, maintains the hive. We're Indiana's largest sustainable fruit farm, so naturally we have a lot of pollination to do, which tends to have a lot of honey. We age that in our first filled bourbon barrels. So after the bourbon gets dumped out of them, first fill is honey. So the honey goes into that raw bourbon barrel and ages between a few months, kind of depends if it's winter or summer, just based off of the extraction. We dump that out, and then we sell the honey up in our estate or put it into cocktails in our food menu at our cafe. And then immediately on that second fill, so it went bourbon first and then filled back up with honey. And now we're going to fill it back up with bourbon or rye to do a honey barrel finish. And it's something that, per unit is probably our most, not allocated, but the most sought after one from us, because I think people know about it more than the one I'm about to mention, which is the cigar batch, the Amburana, which is relatively new to the marketplace. Amburana, or the Starlight cigar batch, is something that, I actually did with my brother for fun. We got one barrel of it, and I honestly wanted to do it as a Brazilian wood finish. And I didn't know what to do with this Amburana wood. It was so intense and so different than typical profile bourbons, and I got a little gun shy, so to speak, with the project. And I was actually about to ready to quote unquote end the project without out producing a product, but it just got overwhelmed too tannic too quickly. Basically after 4 months, it really softened up into this almost like Christmas cookie, super aromatic cinnamon sweetness, and it was something that was really, really complex. And the reason why I called it cigar batch, I won't name the person who actually put it in my head, but I was sitting there and it almost had that Nicaraguan tobacco spice. I'm going to highlight Oliva's V series with it too. It had that like tobacco sweet spice to it, which really led us into the cigar batch realm. And again, we wanted to blaze our own trail when it comes to a cigar batch whiskey, right? This is something we felt as a family paired well with cigars. This wasn't a, we weren't trying to go after more of the Armagnac cognac style. We were going after our own way. And we had to find a cigar that was going to be big enough and fruity enough and spicy enough to hold up with a bold smoking cigar. And naturally, that's where the cigar batch came from. And so in retrospective, we got 2 barrels of it for the first round go around. And then we got 8 others. And we were supposed to have 60 of them land in basically January. That got pushed back to March. That I learned last week got pushed back to October of this year. So the logistics things for COVID is something that's, inhibiting us to get more of these out here. And we want to put more in strategic markets of it. But it was something that, no one, the more and more I talk and the more I read on different forums and whiskey community, it's a flavor profile that no one was really expecting or used to. We hope one day to like I said, get you guys on one and then do just really understand what I'm trying to talk about, because it's such a weird profile to kind of talk about, because it changes person to person. Those cinnamon rye spices, those cookies, that strudel, that lingering finish of it, it's something very complex. And it's something, if you can get your hands onto it, please let us know, tag us, because I absolutely love trying to find our cigar batch tasting notes, because you'd be amazed on how.
I'd love to do it when and if time comes. I think what just happened, a lot of the viewers are Googling cigar batch and trying to get their hands on it, because you've done such a great job selling it. But it doesn't need any help. It sells on its own, and hopefully one day Prime Barrel will be able to actually pick one as well and offer it to our members. I normally do this with everyone. So I offer, well, two things before I forget. First one, as people know, proceeds from every barrel we select, regardless of the distillery, go to different charities. And we've supported over a couple dozen of charities just last year. Since we're picking your barrels, is there a charity that near and dear to your heart that we can contribute to?
Yes. So I do have a charity of choice personally, and our family together has a different one. But Norton Children's Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, is one of my favorite charities to give to. Growing up, my best friend went in and out of the Norton Children's program as a baby, born very, very early on. I don't want to misquote it. Was in and out of hospitals and inside the NICU complications. The Norton Children's family. They do some magical things for kids, and they really, truly, give them a second chance from families that are, abusive, or babies that are preemies. And it's something that I'm very, very passionate about doing too. So that is my charity choice, but I'll leave it up to you guys. Whatever works. I can't thank you enough for doing a charitable organization. As whiskey community, we all know right now, especially within the bourbon boom, there is money in the whiskey market. But let's make it and put it to a good cause, because there is a lot of things in this world that, we can help with. And so like Prime Barrel does, we can't thank you enough for supporting not only, craft distilleries, but supporting communities and charities across the country.
Absolutely. It takes all of us. And I think the collective power channeled the right way is very, very formidable. So we're happy to help, and we'll be making a donation to your charity. And so let's end on this. And like I said, I always do this. Imagine you're in an elevator and 30-second sales pitch, especially for people who have never tried Starlight, right? Which is hard to find nowadays. But if you never had Starlight, 30-second pitch, go.
So Starlight, again, we're a 7th-generation family farm that's been farming for 179 years. We focus under craft, sustainable whiskey, distilled on our farm, aged on our farm, bottled on our farm. We do unique finishes from bourbon, or from unique port, all the way down to Oloroso to Bordeaux. Something for everyone, and unique profiles.
Thank you for your time, for joining us. I'll let you go. Hopefully I'll see you soon in person to pick a couple more barrels. We're actually going to take a couple of our members in person to come with us and have this experience. I think anyone who's in close proximity to your estate, and even if they're not, they should actually make a trek out there. They won't regret it. Last time I was there, I took a few videos of the estate as James was riding us around in a truck. So I'll be posting that as well, so for people to get a taste. I'm excited to launch these two today, see how it goes, and I can't wait for them to try those too.
Well, and to my knowledge too, you're one of the very rare few people that actually can ship abroad too. So those who are listening who are abroad, Starlight really doesn't have an access point that way. So if you're listening to it now and you're on the fence and you're outside this market or outside this country, that's probably your first and best bet to get a bottle of Starlight as well.
You know what? It's a conversation for a different day, but we do work specifically with Australia's market. We work with others as well, but in Australia, it's a huge booming bourbon market as well. And we've done a few collaborations with the bourbon groups out there as well. And one of them actually expressed an interest in Starlight. So perhaps we'll do something collaborative with you guys, and it'll behoove everyone. So, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Thank you so much for jumping on. I'll let you get back to your day. I appreciate your time, and cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, you made it to the very end. Thanks for that. For more engaging conversations, including announcements about our upcoming drops, follow us on Instagram or join our discussion board on Discord. Links are in the description below.